It's a pleasure, as ever, to be doing the special spiritual guest interview for the Compassion Consortium. So, we talk about being interfaith, interspiritual, and interspecies, and this is the interfaith part. And I know that's a part that could be a little bit controversial because everything's controversial now, but I remember even growing up, my grandmother saying, don't talk about politics or religion. So maybe things haven't changed all that much. And yet, I am utterly fascinated by religions, by spiritual teachings, and with all of the problems that are inherent in anything organized. What I believe these traditions have done for our world is immeasurable, and the possibility for the positive that they can do in the future is also huge. I was dealing this weekend with something very, very difficult. And as part of trying to deal with it, I found myself in an Uber, and the driver was wearing this beautiful light blue turban. So I knew that he was a Sikh and he was a man of faith. And then this morning, as I was just finishing up on the saga of the weekend, I had reason to speak with another gentleman who told me that his name was Abraham, and he didn't call me back yesterday because it was the Sabbath, which told me that he was a religious Jew. And I thought, God just shows up to tell me I am everywhere. And that helps me. So we're going to be speaking with someone absolutely delightful today who is part of a religious tradition that does not use the word God and yet is deeply spiritual, deeply beautiful, and has done a great deal for animals in the past and has so much promise to do more in the future. So our guest is Rayane Laddi. He is the host of a fabulous podcast called The Vegan Report, and that's how we met originally. He was kind enough to have me as a guest. He is also involved with Dharma Voices for Animals. We've had some representatives from them as our guests in the past. And these are Buddhists around the world seeking to really bring into action all the Buddhist beautiful teachings of compassion towards all beings. Welcome, Rayane.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you everyone for the warm welcome.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. And I must say that when I got the you have to have this person on the Compassion Consortium was when we were speaking during the podcast or maybe afterwards. You talked about a concern that you have that despite the fact that your generation has the energy and the technology skills and the power behind animal rights and veganism now in a way that we've never seen before, there's still something that we might describe as a lack of soulfulness. Why don't we start with that? What are you seeing and what's the problem?
Well, talking about being a bit controversial here, I think, if we look at studies on the vegan community and the vegan, animal advocacy movement, most people are not religious at all, consider themselves, atheists or, completely secular without, a spiritual practice. And when I look at that, I think of it as a fundraiser. So that's what I do for a living. I invite people to be generous, to make donations for different charities and good causes. And what I often tell those charities and good causes is you are offering the world space, an occasion, an opportunity to do good, but to also to give meaning to their life. That's what giving brings to people. It brings them joy. It brings them meaning on a spiritual level. And there's a reason why most donors out there are religious people. Well, let's use the same logic with veganism. When we invite people to give up, animal products and to adopt veganism, what do they gain from that on a spiritual, at the spiritual level? What kind of meaning do they gain in their life? What kind of joy do they experience? And, I've always looked at veganism that way, as an opportunity to go through an incredible experience of, connecting with the rest of the animal kingdom and with Earth, and some of the beautiful sentiments that you have expressed earlier in prayers and, the sermons in the introduction. Well, you know, I feel like that's the challenge we're not, addressing right now, because there's this bias in the community of, not being um, um, religious, and so not understanding what we're asking people to do, to give up, and to gain. So there is that, and there is also the fact that we're not reaching out to religious communities. Initiatives to reach out to religious communities are, very small. There aren't that many. I could count all of them, in my 10 fingers. And, it is underfunded. Again, there's that bias playing there from the funders' part. They don't see the value in that. So there is a whole segment of the population for whom, veganism do not make much sense, because we're not talking their language. We're not, building spiritual bridges with them and their communities. And we're not, wrapping veganism in that, cover of spirituality. And so when we don't do that, we are, stopping ourselves from making progress in this movement. And we're really, I think, negatively affecting the lives of many animals. And so I try a lot to convince mostly non-religious people of that, being more aware of their possible bias against, reaching out to religious communities and not having any spirituality, and, gaining some knowledge on, the potential that is there to make an incredible impact for veganism and the animal cause.
So tell us a little bit about you, Ryan. So you are a young spiritual vegan, very active in animal rights. You're also a practicing Buddhist, French Canadian. So tell us about your life.
Yes. Well, we often hear that question, how did you become vegan? And I've had that question a lot of, how did you become Buddhist? And, to those questions, and most of them in terms of why did you choose this path in life and why did you become this way? I often like to say that things choose you. You're not the one making the choices. And so veganism chose me, Buddhism chose me. I don't know why I became vegan and Buddhist. That's the honest answer. And I don't think anyone knows really, because it's an addition of so many different factors. And I'm sure that half of them, we're completely unconscious about. And there's a danger to, having the conceit of thinking, I know why I'm vegan, or I know why I'm Buddhist, I know why I'm this way. Because then, we tell ourselves stories on why we are this or that way. And those stories, give birth to assumptions. So for instance, on veganism, some people say, I became vegan after watching Dominion, that, popular documentary. And so they make the assumption that this is the way of, advancing veganism, showing people that documentary. But the real question is, why, did you react this way to that documentary? And there is a possibility that others, will not react the same way as you did. And so some may react, with indifference. Others may even have a negative reaction to that documentary, and then think that the reason for that is not, factory farming. It's the person who made me watch the documentary, so the bad vegans. And so, it's complex, but, I invite people to just embrace their ignorance about, the causes and conditions that made them who they are. I think it's more truthful, and also it's more productive in terms of advocacy.
So rather than delve into why you're vegan or why you're Buddhist, tell us a little bit about the how. Tell us about your spiritual practice and your vegan life.
For sure. So, in terms of Buddhism, the Buddha summarizes Buddhism in three simple points: abstaining from evil, doing good, and purifying the mind. That's it. And, when we talk about abstaining from evil, we have five precepts. So, those are precepts that we take as practicing Buddhists every morning. And, the first one is abstaining from destroying sentient beings. Now it says sentient beings, it doesn't say humans. So it includes all creatures, insects, animals, and so on. And for me, it resonates a lot because, again, I'm a fundraiser. I'm passionate about the topic of giving and generosity. And this is how the Buddha presents that precept, those five precepts. He says, for the first one, you should abstain from destroying sentient beings. And that way you can offer the world safety. You can offer to so many beings out there trust and safety and a world where they can feel comfortable because they're not threatened, their life is not threatened. And, he does the same thing with not stealing, which is the second precept, not having, sexual misconduct, the third one, not lying, that's the hardest one in Buddhism. And, the fifth, because there are, all of those white lies that, we want to tell to be polite. And the fifth one, not drinking. Or taking intoxicants. So I feel, it's beautiful and it goes hand in hand with my outlook as a vegan, because that's what I do, as, becoming vegan, it's a gift that I offer to the world, to so many animals, and to myself.
Beautiful. So I think that a lot of people who are not very familiar with Buddhism just assume that all Buddhists are vegetarian, and yet that's not the case. How come?
Well, I understand the assumption because one of the main branches of Buddhism is Mahayana Buddhism. And often, if you go to a Mahayana temple, they will have strictly vegetarian food served there, to the monastic community. But then the lay people are not vegetarian mostly. They're not, even vegan. And, it's a good question. And that's a question we struggle with, at Dharma Voices for Animals. It's the $1 million question. And, I think of it that way. This is not the only shortcoming of Buddhism. I could talk about the place of women in the Buddhist monastic community. That's a big issue there too. There isn't gender equality so much in the monastic community, and that's an issue that many of us in lay people want to see addressed. And I could name other problems that Buddhist and Buddhist religion has, but the ideal and the core teachings of Buddhism are clear on that topic. That's the important thing. They are truly, a motivation to go vegan. I talked about the first precept. How can you not, take the first precept and not consider becoming vegan? Again, it goes hand in hand. That's the ideal. But we're humans. We are flawed. And, to draw a parallel with my previous point about, not knowing why we are the way we are, that determinism, you can apply it to others. And when you do so, it is much easier to show compassion to your fellow person. Why? Because you stop judging. You think, well, they're that way because of their conditioning, because of their education, because of their culture. And I'm this way, not because I'm a better person or I'm a superior person or something. It's just because of my conditioning. I was fortunate to respond well to the vegan message of compassion and to embrace it in my life. And this other person has not been as fortunate. And that's it. So, no judgment. You're not bad or good for doing something. You're just, the result of your conditioning.
So, given that, how do you speak to non-vegans, whether fellow Buddhists or others? How do you carry this message in this kind and gentle way that you're speaking to us?
Well, I carry that message. That message carries me. And, with the hope that it resonates with that person, that, it's the right time, that it's the right wording, and that, it makes an impact. And I think that with Buddhists, it is easier because they have that ideal in mind. They have those core teachings that do not go against the vegan message of compassion. So I've seen them being more receptive to it, and often it just has to do with ignorance about factory farming. We live kind of in our own bubble in a way because our closest friends are most likely vegan, and we go to vegan restaurants, and we do some vegan activities. And so it's hard to think that some people are still ignorant about factory farming, yet there are so many of them that are. And so again, be careful of your assumptions, and have an open mind.
Okay. Well, you have an open mind and a wonderful podcast. So let's move over to the podcast. It's quite unique. So if you can share with us what the podcast is about, what you're trying to do there, and then also get a little bit practical, because I'll bet there are a lot of people listening to this who would like to be a guest on podcasts or maybe start their own podcast. So if you have any wisdom that you have learned in your podcasting career, we'll take it.
Of course. Well, you also have a great podcast, Victoria. So maybe you can, help me deliver some of that wisdom. But yeah, the vegan report, when I started thinking about how can I be helpful for the vegan cause and the animal rights, movement, I thought maybe my role will be to build up the community. And how can I do so? Well, what if I created the space where we could have some thought-provoking conversations, critical conversations about the way we do activism? So we are, used to debating non-vegans. We debate them left and right in campuses, in the street, everywhere. But what about debating ourselves? Debating our point of views, comparing them, and thinking critically about how we do things. And that's the platform I wanted to create. I wanted to invite, animal rights activists from everywhere, and ask them some difficult questions about the future of activism. How efficient are we at doing this type of activism, and so on. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And, if you're thinking about launching a podcast, um, I guess two recommendations. First of all, think of it as a business because that's really what it is. It will, eat away from your time and energy, just like a business would. Um, but also, you need to have fun doing it because if you don't, you'll stop recording those episodes. And I've seen so many vegan activists starting their own podcast only to stop after episode 3, 4, 5. There are so many abandoned vegan podcasts out there. It's ruin um, ruins of old podcasts that had promising future. But if you're not driven to do the work, if you're not uh, uh, just you have that passion for discovering new people and having interesting conversations, then podcast might not be for you unless you like doing some monologues. Then then podcasting might be for you. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Cool. Thank you. So we only have about a minute and a half to go, but could you take that minute and a half to tell us about your latest project, an app, Map Your Health?
Yes, so Map Your Health is an application I'm developing, and the goal of Map Your Health, sorry, is to inform you of the many environmental health risks in your surrounding, in your neighborhood, and so on. We have a web version that is going to launch soon, and I'm really excited about it. And what I mean by environmental health risk, well, pollutants, in your local industrial, factory, what kind of, pollutants are they emitting in the water, in the air, but also pathogens. The list goes on of all the environmental health risks out there. I think we talk a lot about mental health and fitness and nutrition, but what about environmental health? That's really, really, really important. And I'm happy to launch the very first tool out there, for getting informed and making a good decision. So if people are interested and want to engage with this project, visit mapyourhealth.info.
Fascinating. You definitely look at things from a unique perspective. Thank you so much for spending this time with the Compassion Consortium. And everybody, Ryan will stay around for breakout rooms. He's going to actually be coming into the vegan information breakout room. So if you want more from Ryan, you can find him there.